Today we're going to have a look at the role discomfort plays in our society and how stupidly absurd physical challenges will make the memories of a lifetime. What you see right now is us on our longest hike last year. I didn't think that this video would ever make it up on YouTube. We had the plan to cross a mountain chain in one of Norway's bigger national parks. It ended up being quite a mess of a hike, and I didn't film nearly as much as I wanted to, but now, half a year later, I finally realized that there was a very important lesson to learn from it. To give you a little bit more input, this hike is called Sjøbergmarsruta, which translates into something along the lines of Mountain Ocean Road. In the Norwegian hiking maps, it's marked red, and therefore declared demanding. The hike down from the parking space across the mountain chain is in total 21.2 kilometers long, and it's assumed to take about 8 hours to complete the 1,369 meters in height. Sjøbergmarsruta has quite some history. In World War II, it has been used to transport weapons over the mountain chain to support the resistance. It is quite easy to imagine how many people have before suffered through the 20+ kilometers. We were at the end of our road trip and decided to use the last good weather window in the area to walk over to the fjord on the other side, pitch a tent, spend the night there, have a bit of fishing, and then walk back at the following day. With me filming, our hikes normally take much longer, so we were prepared for 10 to 11 hours instead of the 8 hours suggested on the internet. In the week leading up to this hike, we had already walked 100 kilometers on an island chain in the area, so we thought this hike, the longest we have been on so far, would be a perfect season finale of this year's road trip. It was obviously an ambitious project, but for me it's only worth it if you're at least feeling a little bit nervous once you arrive. Thea was slightly concerned as we only had one rest day between the last hike and this one, but I obviously was convincing enough, saying that even if this would go down the drain, it would be probably the best memories of the whole trip. After speaking about it in one of the more recent videos, I think now we should have a closer look at what happens if we find us in more extreme physical challenges. Discomfort from physical exhaustion in nature is an amazing resource, and the only discomfort we experience nowadays is more towards financial pressure and stress. Otherwise, we probably all live in a heated flat with food available 24/7. So whenever we experience discomfort in a different way, there seems to be something magical happening to our minds. Back when I was living in Germany, I didn't have these pretty mountains to scratch my itch on, so I normally took my physical challenges to the gym. It manifested itself back then in things like doing 500 incline push-ups and 500 ring pull-ups with my back then roommate, Leon. It was physically much harder than expected, taking over 4 hours, and definitely brought us quite often to the point where we wanted to quit. I know it may sound off for some people, but this afternoon, with the physical challenge and the social aspect, turned into one of the core memories that I have from my 3 years in Hamburg. Even receiving my bachelor's degree after writing a 100-page systematic review on vitamin D and performance enhancement does retrospectively not at all feel as significant as the pull-up challenge. In Vietnam, these projects were a little less physical and centered more around extremely long motorbike trips. The freedom that came with owning one was very seductive. So I often ended up in the jungle roads on the border to Laos, not knowing if the engine or the motorbike would hold. or if I would have to push it back to whatever workshop I would find 50, 100 kilometers from there. After moving to Denmark, things changed a little again, and I was back to the physical challenges. Studying was never really fulfilling me, and the gym couldn't scratch the itch either. So when Leon joined for a visit in Copenhagen, we decided to go for an absolutely unprepared 150-kilometer bike ride on a pair of bikes that should have never seen such a journey.
404. It's not even really bright. We're going to create some memories on a budget today. How are you feeling today? We have 23 more to go.
We ended up having a nap on a severely uncomfortable pebble beach. Having just one bar of chocolate with us seemed like a great idea in the beginning, but came with a little more hunger than expected. Even that couldn't take any of the joy of the experience. As you see in this shot, we have been a little overwhelmed by the situation, and my tank top, as well as the sunburn, has definitely seen better days. As a result of our growling stomachs, on the way back we pretty much raided every single fruit tree and berry bush we could get our hands on. And basically ate everything, from half-ripe apples, to plums, to berries on the roadside. At that point, they were all tasting much better than you maybe expect. When we stopped at a little cafe to fill up on caffeine, Leon decided it would be an amazing idea to spoon the whole sugar pot that was given to us with the coffee. A year or so later, when I was working together with a clothing brand that tried to push boundaries, it was obvious to me that we needed another one of these absurd physical challenges. I ended up riding a push bike from Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark, to Hamburg in Germany. If I'm not completely wrong, then it ended up being a 350-kilometer bike ride. The whole trip was done on a city racer bike, with a rather uncomfortable leather saddle, wearing a wool coat and a pair of office pants. And once more, this was great fun. Niklas, the guy that was filming, and me ended up having dinners at old quarries, and I basically drove through every kind of weather and even saw some weird explosives going off on a side road in the pitch black just before arriving at the Airbnb for the night.
After the bike ride, but this one's saving lives. It has never tasted that good though.
Nope.
There is this special thing with all these adventures that at one point the exhaustion is high enough that even like mundane, not really funny appearing things turn into the biggest laughs.
Ready to
rumble.
Yeah.
In a minute.
It takes so long getting the chair. I didn't know what to do, like.
Rewatching the footage at this point, I cannot make out why I found this situation so extremely funny. Nevertheless, I get the same positive emotions that I had back then by just sitting here behind my desktop. That to me is truly priceless. While staying at the remote cabin, I have been starting to read The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. It's a book where Michael explores the concept of Misogi along his personal physical challenge. A 3-week hunting trip in remote Alaska with a guy called Donnie Vincent. Very plainly said, Misogi is an ancient Japanese religious practice where people aim for spiritual purification, doing physical challenges that bring themselves to the border of their capabilities. One example for these practices is standing as long as possible under an ice-cold waterfall. The comfort crisis surrounds this concept, not necessarily in terms of spiritual purification, but using the physical challenges that bring you to the border of what you're capable of to develop either personally or physically. Now looking back at the projects that I've been in the past years, my motivation has definitely been different than the one in the original Misogi, but in the end it was a quite similar outcome as I contribute much of my physical and mental development to these events. In order to generate a bit of a framework for these Misogi-like but non-religious experiences, he speaks to Dr. Marcus Elliott, who came up with 2 rules. Rule number 1 is that it has to be really fucking hard, and rule number 2 is that you can't die. There's an addition to this where he mentioned that it should be intrinsically driven and not be meant for sharing. I can agree with his standpoint, but I still think that there's quite some value in sharing these events. And that's why you're here watching this involuntary Misogi experience that we had on Sjöbergmarsroute. Crossing the mountain chain actually went pretty well. We had no incidences, I mean it was a long hike, but the weather was great and eventually we made it down to the other side. But then something happened that we didn't really calculate with. Alright, we just walked 18 kilometers down over a mountain chain, as you have seen in some of the previous clips. Most of this was stones. So you basically walk up slowly through a forest and a bit of swampland, then make it to one peak, and from the one peak to this position here, where you can see the fjord of the other part of the mountain chain, it's just up and down on rocks. So not the most exciting hike, something very nice to do, something very meditative, but not really exciting. The exciting part was that we would go down to this fjord, pitch a tent and stay for a night and be able to fish a little and just have a good and relaxed time. That was the plan, but now that we sat down here, had a little break with the fjord view, we rechecked the weather forecast and it switched from rain tomorrow afternoon to rain in the night and quite high likelihood of lightning strikes, which is not the most comfortable thing to have in the mountains. So we're pondering a little on if we should use the weather that we have right now and already start walking back without having the relaxing part down there. Doesn't seem so nice to get back into the boots and add more kilometers to the 18 kilometers, as everything is actually aching and hurting. Hips like traps and feet are pretty crushed. But it also doesn't seem too wise to stay a bit longer and get the chance of running into a few thunder and lightning. Our plan so far is to just have a break here, eat a little, rest up a little, drink more water, and then put the stuff back on and go back as far as we can, and then set up the tent instead of going down here and having to go back up tomorrow morning. Yeah. This was really not what we hoped for, but in mountains we have learned once more it is hard to predict what's coming, and sometimes you need to take the decisions you don't want to make, actually. The decision of going back in the same day to avoid the lighting was turning this hike from a regular and straining hike into a full-on Misogi experience.
We have our first kilometer in now. It feels quite okay when you're walking and your feet are not hurting that much as when you're actually relaxing and sitting down. But it's 1 out of 18 kilometers, so I guess we'll see very soon if this is going to work out or not. But for now, feeling pretty good. This is now the first and hardest ascent of the way back. The strength is not really there anymore, and it looks too steep for my taste, and her taste, and his taste. But it should be not more than 25 minutes upwards, a bit steeper, and then 1.5 hours more in a easier ascent. And then we're at the peak, and it's just 10 kilometers downhill.
About halfway back to the cabin that we saw in the beginning of the hike, adrenaline really kicked in. For me, that manifested in counting my steps and replaying the same song in my head over and over and over again, without even realizing that we're walking through one of the most beautiful sunsets that I had seen in a while.
We are past the highest peak now, means only downhill, and it's just shortly after sunset, 20 to 40. Means we're at quite a good pace. So far so good. The adrenaline is keeping the walk going despite the numb feet. We cross. Now that it's dark, it's getting a bit harder to find the markings of the path, so it takes a little longer to go from one spot to the next. I hope we're just managing to stay somewhat onto it.
Eventually, we made it to the cabin at 2:30 in the morning in the pitch black, after being stuck in the swamp for a while. We got lost a few times, missing the markings that indicate the way, but Yuki is a real lifesaver in these situations, as he always finds the correct way back to where we came from. As we arrived, it was such a bliss to take off the backpack and shoes, rob over to the bunk bed and pass out immediately. Taking the leap, failing Sjöbergmarsroute and thereby having the longest and most uncomfortable hike we ever had turned into a core memory, and for me was a true experience of Misogi. If you're also looking into breaking out of these ever-repeating daily routines and make memories of a lifetime, pick an adventure and make sure it sucks a lot. I promise you, it will work. Just remember rule number 2, don't die.